We also saw GENADs as potential disruptors of military culture, as people who would bring feminist values into the heart of profoundly patriarchal institutions. DCAF continued to work with GENADs through the ELSI initiative on women in peacekeeping operations, through sharing advice and resources with the NATO and EU military GENADs, advising on and supporting the work of GENADs in many countries. So, for example, DCAF has helped to train the military GENADs in Georgia and is currently with UN Women Georgia, working with the Ministry of Defence there to review GENAD's achievements and continue to strengthen their role. But do we, as the WPS and gender community, still have the same very high hopes of what GENADs can achieve? What is it that makes GENADs effective and what hampers them? I think this webinar is a really unique and interesting opportunity to share and reflect on those questions. So this webinar is one of a webinar series that we hold every 2 to 3 months. The webinars are grounded in the Gender and Security Toolkit, a set of resources jointly published by UN Women, OSCE, ODIHR and DCAF in 2020. The toolkit offers guidance on how to promote gender equality within the security and justice sector, and how the security and justice sector can both integrate gender and contribute to gender equality in their broader societies. Now, I very much hope you all have a copy of Tool 1, which looks like this. Oh, you can't see it. Oh, here we go. It disappears into my background. But Tool 1 on security sector governance, security sector reform and gender, and Tool 3 on defence reform and gender. Tool 1 has a whole section addressing GENADs and gender focal points, and Tool 3 is really an essential resource, I think, for anybody doing this sort of work in a military context. Allow me to mention that it's available in 8 languages already: English, Spanish, French, Georgian, Russian, I'm being told, is going up on the website as we speak. Today's webinar combines a really fantastic expert panel to whom you'll be introduced a bit later in the program, with the launch of an exciting new study from Monash University's Gender, Peace and Security Research Centre, which is titled A Global Review of the Development of Military Gender Advisor Capabilities. To share the study's key findings, it's my pleasure now to introduce one of the authors, Associate Professor Dr. Katrina Liku. Really excited to have you with us, Katrina, and over to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Megan, and hello, everyone. I'm speaking from Melbourne, Australia, the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I acknowledge them as this land's traditional owners. So let me begin by thanking the research reports research team. So along with myself, Eleanor Gordon, Sarah Brown, and Jennifer Whitwer all co-wrote this report. I also acknowledge the Australian government who have funded the project, noting, of course, that the research is our own. So this research began as a result of discussions between Eleanor and myself, who, as Megan said, are academic researchers of gender, peace and security, and in Eleanor's case, a former practitioner, and Sarah and Jen, who are former military gender advisors. In Jen's case, she was deployed as the first Australian Defence Force gender advisor to NATO command in Afghanistan. So our discussions began by acknowledging the commitment of gender advisors to advancing the WPS agenda, but also noting that the lessons learned haven't always been effectively captured. So the report is therefore designed to offer an independent, research-based overview of the development of military gender advisor capabilities around the world. Acknowledging the diversity, of course, within and between countries and different deployments, what we try to do is to identify the major, common and persistent issues that have both positively and negatively affected that development. So we've done so by reviewing open source research, and I acknowledge the excellent work done by DCAF, which Megan has mentioned, but we also conducted over 50 interviews with current and former GENADs. And many of our interviews are on this call, so I'd like to take a moment to publicly thank you and your organisations for your generosity in sharing your experiences so openly with us. So the report provides analyses, findings, and recommendations organised around 3 areas. We look at policy, organisational structures, and organisational cultures. Natasha's very kindly put a link to the report in the chat, but I'd like to briefly highlight a few of the report's key findings. So overall, in the report, we strongly advocate for gender advising to be treated as a military capability. We conceptualise gender advising as a capability akin to political or legal advising. We therefore see it as a role that requires significant knowledge, specific technical expertise, sufficient rank, and access to strategic level policy and decision making. Yet the extent to which this occurs through commitments to things we explore in the report, such as training, policy implementation, and resourcing, is often haphazard, even when it is embedded in policies such as national action plans. This points to our second finding, which is that there's a general failure to consistently and comprehensively institutionalize the WPS agenda, particularly in military organizations. As Megan suggested, the WPS agenda is the bedrock of GENAD work, but we found that WPS is still not well understood across military organizations and their leadership. It's still not consistently seeing a strong political commitment, and therefore efforts to institutionalize it remain ad hoc. Most of the GENADs we talked to spoke about insufficient policy, clarity, and gravitas wrapping around their roles. They noted that funding and resourcing was piecemeal, variable, and inconsistent. And they also noted that within their organisations, they found limited career paths, particularly for those who were committed to gender advising. Instead, what we found was that GENAD capabilities are often reliant upon the vision of individual military leaders, and of course, the grit and hard work of individual GENADs. This also relates to the challenges posed by military cultures. Throughout the research, GENAD spoke to us of attitudes to their work that ranged from everything from openly hostile attitudes to those who were dismissive, to those who were uncertain about what it is they did, to those who really championed their work. And often they found this on the one day. So GENADs told us that they really needed to deftly navigate these terrains, which of course is a job made easier when there's supportive leadership and organisational infrastructure. But while the cultures of cynicism persist, so too did we find that there's movement to strengthen GENAD work. And as noted by Irene Fellon in the report's forward, it's therefore a really useful moment for us to have this webinar, to pause and take stock about where we've been and where it's going. And this is of course best done with good quality research and data. We note in the report that there's a general paucity of monitoring and evaluation of GENAD work, and that the successes, challenges, and lessons learned are rarely consistently or formally captured. So our hope in the report and in the webinar is that our research can contribute in a small way to advancing this. Overall, we found that military GENADs have a significant impact upon the advancement of peace and security around the world. But we feel these stories need to be told. So we therefore hope that the report resonates with many of you and that it can provide a useful tool for military organisations to advance the development of GENAD capabilities in national organisations around the world. So I'd now like to introduce the moderator and one of the report's co-authors, Dr. Eleanor Gordon, and I very much look forward to hearing the rest of the speakers. Thanks, Eleanor.
Thank you so much, Kate. On behalf of our event co-hosts and co-authors of the report, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you to this conversation with a panel of experts on military gender advisors, or GENADs for short. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking here in Melbourne, the Kulin Nation people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future. As Kate has mentioned, this event launches the report, a global review of the development of military GENAD capabilities. We hope this report and this webinar will help raise awareness of the role and value of GENADs in military organisations, as well as the challenges they face in their work. The primary role of a GENAD is to operationalise the UN Women, Peace and Security Agenda within and through the work of military organisations. Internally, this can mean advising on how to undertake gender analyses and integrate gender perspectives across the organisation's internal, operational and decision-making processes. It can also mean how to advance women's participation, leadership and meaningful inclusion in the organisation itself. Externally, their work can help ensure that deployments to conflict zones or crisis contexts are gender sensitive and gender responsive and can thereby better contribute to building and sustaining peace and enabling recovery. The work of the GENAD can therefore be seen to be critical to both organisational and operational effectiveness, as well as to advancing implementation of the WPS agenda and contributing to building more gender equitable, sustainable and meaningful peace and security. There are potential challenges to optimal engagement and impact, some of which Kate has just referred to and will be explored further in this webinar.
Eleanor?
Yes?
My
Sorry.
apologies for interrupting. The interpreters are mentioning that your voice is quite low. I'm wondering if you could speak up just a little bit more loudly for the benefit of the participants and interpreters, and my apologies for stepping in.
No, I'm sorry. I'll try and talk loudly. It might be my microphone. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, alongside these challenges, which range from resource and training limitations, normative assumptions about gender and military organisations, lack of understanding regarding the value of gender responsiveness, and a failure to recognise that the WPS agenda is a shared responsibility for everyone and one that requires leadership at the command level. Alongside these challenges, there are very many opportunities. These include building upon the work and achievements of GENADs in military organisations, and through our research we found that chief amongst these opportunities is an informed, dynamic, passionate and supportive community of GENADs and also gender focal points. So it's my pleasure to now introduce our 5 speakers. I hope you can all hear me okay. All have a wealth of expertise on gender and security and extensive professional experience as gender advisors within military organisations. Firstly, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Lena Gvarving is from Norway. She's currently Officer in Command for the Educations and Training Department at the Nordic Centre for Gender in Military Operations. She's been seconded to the OSCE as a gender advisor for the politico-military domain, worked as head instructor for UN operations, and has been leader of the gender project at the Norwegian Defence University College. She's also been senior staff officer on equality, diversity and gender perspectives, and has held various military positions in Norway, the US and Afghanistan. She has a doctorate from the University of Oslo on barriers to and enablers of the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in the Norwegian Armed Forces and NATO. Claire Hutchinson is an international expert on the WPS agenda and human security. Until recently, she was the NATO Secretary General's Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security. Previously, she was gender advisor with the UN for over a decade, during which time she was instrumental in setting the strategic development of the WPS agenda for the UN Department of Peace Operations. Lieutenant Colonel Perro petland is the gender advisor in the Norwegian Defence Staff. Previously, he spent 4 years as course director and subject matter expert at the Nordic Centre for Gender in Military Operations, responsible for planning, delivering and evaluating courses for gender advisors and gender focal points. He has also spent 8 years as the main instructor for gender at the Norwegian Air Force Junior Officer Cadet School. He has deployed for a total of 4 years to the Middle East, Africa and Afghanistan on missions for UN and NATO, including as gender advisor at the International Security Assistance Force headquarters in Afghanistan in 2013. Lieutenant Colonel Lausanne Sengamina Ingabia is a capability officer and gender specialist in the Office of Military Affairs of the UN Department of Peace Operations and serves in the Rwandan Defence Force for many years. In this capacity, she has been deployed on peace operations, including as a peacekeeper with MISCA and MINUSCA, respectively the AU and UN missions in the Central African Republic. Major Yasmina Omegovic is the gender advisor to the Chief of the Joint Staff of the Bosnia and Herzegovina Armed Forces, where she works on integrating gender and advancing gender equality into all activities of the BIH Armed Forces. She has spent 28 years in active service with the Armed Forces of BIH and has participated in peace operations addressing gender issues, including the NATO mission Resolute Support in Afghanistan and the UN mission MINUSMA in Mali. Thank you each very much for being here. Each speaker will speak for about 5 minutes on the work of military gender advisors, drawing from their own extensive experience, highlighting some of the achievements of gender advisors and the opportunities they offer to military organisations and broader efforts to advance the women, peace and security agenda, as well as challenges that can be faced and ways to address those challenges. We will also reserve some time for questions at the end. You can ask questions of our 5 speakers and Professor Katrina Liku on the report, and there's a web link as mentioned in the chat to the report. You can ask questions in French, Spanish, Georgian, Russian or English. I'd like to now hand over to our first speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Lena Kavarving. Thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to hearing your comments on the role of the GENAD, challenges you may have faced, and opportunities and recommendations. Thank you very much, Lena.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you for letting me be part of this distinguished panel. I have had the honor of working with many of the presenters. But I also want to mention that my thoughts here today are my own, not that of the Norwegian Armed Forces or the Nordic Center for Gender and Military Operations. The study gives a great overview of the GENAD role. It describes different views and experiences, some successes and some challenges. But in my 5 minutes, I have decided to focus on the one thing I find that GENADs need to move forward and be successful in their work, and that is leadership. I am tired of leadership being promoted and honored for being supportive to the women, peace and security agenda and gender perspectives. We do not need leadership that is simply supportive. We need leaders to lead. At the NATO Committee on Gender Perspectives last December, one military leader said it would take generations to change this. Really? He is not the only one I've heard that allows themselves generations to solve a task. And I ask myself, in what other company or organization would leadership still remain in power if they allowed themselves generations to fix a problem? And would they themselves be content with this approach if they were the ones affected by lack of implementation? I don't think so. Which leads me to my next point. We need some serious accountability when it comes to leadership. If it has no consequences, positive or negative, if you as leaders solve this task or not, change is extremely difficult. And change is what this is all about. And we know that change can be uncomfortable, but that is why it is so important that leaders know how to lead that transformational change within their organizations that Megan mentioned. That was her hopes for the GENADs. It is especially important when the change challenges the existing hegemonic masculine organizational culture, the existing power structure, challenges the ones with power of definition, and maybe the most difficult of all, it challenges privileges. Because the women, peace and security agenda is not just about protection and prevention, it also calls for a change of power. I'm often asked what I think if the lack of leadership is due to lack of ability or lack of will. I tell them it is, of course, connected, but the main reason is always the lack of will. Because if they do not have the knowledge or the ability, but the will, they will make sure they get the necessary knowledge and ability, but only if they're willing to. And for GENAD advisors to have to be the ones to tell the leadership this, often give the gender advisors the role of whistleblowers. And we know how uncomfortable that role is. And it will do no good for your career to be the one to kick both up and down in the organization, as mentioned in the report. It is an ungrateful role, but it is a necessary job to be done. That can make the GENAD role also a lonely one. And I know GENADs that has simply said that they do not want to do this anymore. It is too demanding. They want to be appreciated for their knowledge and efforts, not to be sabotaged and ridiculed by leadership and colleagues because gender is the joke of the day. So I want to emphasize the cost of being GENADs, especially for those that have had leaders that do not lead in this matter and that are not even supportive. However, we need to be very careful not to be tempted to use buzzwords or examples or research that are not valid in an effort to get access. Or what was mentioned in the report, it could be easier if the pill is sugar-coated. I think it can quickly backfire and become a very bitter pill. It will most definitely be exposed and can set the work back because there are no shortcuts in this work. Rephrasing to not rub someone the wrong way will not create transformational organizational change. One of the things I think we say to excess is the promise of effectiveness. Some even say that this is not about equality, but about effectiveness. That should make them listen, right? But it is about equality. And we always need to explain effectiveness in regards to something. Effectiveness in the sense that it contributes to reach the desired end state, an expressed goal. Not just say that gender perspectives make military operations more effective, because it might not in every context. It might create added and difficult dilemmas. Lastly, let me just say thank you to the gender community. Your support and care for me and for each other, it's instrumental. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lena. Some fantastic recommendations and highlighting some of the challenges related to issues of power, power relations, and the need for leadership and the transformational change that you refer to. Thank you so much. I'd like to hand to Claire Hutchinson, Advisor on Women, Peace and Security, please. Claire, welcome. Lovely to see you.
Thanks very much, Eleanor, and good to see you. And thank you so much for the invitation to participate. And I was also very happy to be able to contribute to the report, and congratulations on the report. It is a stellar report and one that has been needed. And I look forward to many of the recommendations or the ideas being implemented as we move forward in changing the way gender advisors and the world appreciating gender advisors. I want to first of all just say that I started working as a gender advisor in 2003 in the United Nations mission in Kosovo. And unfortunately, back then, many of the challenges that gender advisors are seeing today were exactly the same we had back then. And that is tragic in a way, because we don't seem to have moved that much forward. For the UN at the time, it was only civilian deployment of gender advisors. And very early on, as you may know, the UN deployed from 1999 gender advisors. And it was much later that military gender advisors came into play because it was missing a big part in peacekeeping of the community, being military and the thousands, hundreds of thousands that are deployed under the military community. But out of the report, and at the same time as the report was being done, as some may know, in NATO, when I worked in NATO, we were also drafting a report on gender advisors and efficacy, which was an internal report. And a lot of the findings match. And I just want to pick up on a few areas. One of the main areas is about who are we deploying. Out of the report we did, that only 24% of gender advisors had previous experience. And I think it is important because then we contribute to this narrative that gender is simply anyone can do it, it's easily picked up, that it's not necessarily serious. And I think this has been a narrative that has long been. When I first joined, again in 2003, many people said to me, anyone can do this job. Anyone who's a woman can do this job. And again, I think we have the same conversations today. And it's not that easy. So no, not everybody can do this. There is certain characteristics you also need to work in gender, but you also need a lot of knowledge. And that, even as an operational actor, you need strategic knowledge. And you need to know how to strategically place your operational advice when necessary. So I think that is some of the concerns that remain, and how do we address that? The second thing about the levels and what level do we bring in as a gender advisor? And it should be the same as anything else. If you have a pollard at a certain level, if the pollard is a lieutenant colonel or a colonel, then it should be the same. Because constantly we're marginalizing gender advisors by making them different. If you have a pollard who has a certain qualification or skill or doing a certain thing, so should your gender advisor. Because what we don't want to have, and what does happen even today, is that it becomes a special issue or a specialized outside of the mainstream. And unfortunately, this continues so that we don't get taken seriously, and that the concept of gender becomes one of the other and not part of the ingrained military structure. Another of the concerns, I think, is about the deployment time. And if your role as a gender advisor is to be strategic and advise, okay, maybe your 6 months could possibly work within rotation. But if you're supposed to be working with community, 6 months doesn't cut it. You can't build trust in 6 months. So you deploy a gender advisor, and within a couple of months, you get used to what's happening. You get to know your interlocutors of the international community, and then you deploy back out. And so it doesn't allow the credibility of what you're doing to resonate with either the community or to continue the work within the mission. And I think it's a huge problem. There are some good examples of this where having experts seconded so that they can be within a 2 or 3 year time frame, which allows the work to continue. And I think they're very good practices. As well as the practice that NATO had started with having both a military and civilian gender advisor working together. The idea that gender is the woman's issue, constantly a huge problem, and that this hasn't changed. And I'm hoping one of the ways we can reform the mandate of Women, Peace and Security, which uses the word woman, is to start looking at this as a whole of security approach, because it isn't, as we all know, a woman's issue, and it doesn't need a woman to deal with it, which takes me on to one of the biggest areas, I think, which is problematic. That the gender advisor is not the moral compass for a mission. The gender advisor is not there to make people better behaved. The gender advisor is there to do the work in terms of gender integration. And unfortunately, it falls, or the conversation often falls, to the gender advisor working with, in the UN, it's conduct and discipline team, or they work to be talk to survivors of sexual violence. And I'm not dismissing these as important roles, but it isn't the gender advisor's role. And if we keep marginalizing and saying women are good at communication, or women are good at integrating with the community, we are going to constantly marginalize the important issue of gender mainstreaming, the important issue of gender, and also the credibility and legitimacy of gender advisors. And then just on the final point, the competing mandates is also a challenge, which I think we have to take stock of. Bringing in, and the report was very good at mentioning this, human security and deployment of human security advisors. A gender advisor should do gender. A child protection advisor should do child protection. And never the twain shall meet. But while coordination and collaboration has to happen, you don't have time, if you're doing your job right, to take on other mandates, and nor should you. And I think one of the ongoing conversations is about what should a gender advisor take on under the mantle within the mission of human security, as well as other cross-cutting portfolios. And this is becoming more and more of a heated and urgent conversation that I think we need to have. And then that goes back to how leadership defines and understands gender and the role of gender advisor. So I think we have a lot of challenges. And again, like I said, they're not new challenges. They're challenges that have existed for many years. That in itself is telling. But I think it's time that we do move the bar, and that we recognize this is a competency, a capability, and a very important role. And I think it's all been very expressed very well in the report. So thank you again for having me here on this panel, and I look forward to hearing from everyone else. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thanks for those fantastic points, and resonate with a lot of the findings, as you indicated in the report, about the need for there to be a clear career structure, and the role needs to be articulated. There needs to be strong leadership. Your final points about gender advisors not being the moral compass is extremely persuasive, and I'd love to hear more about that later. Thank you so much. We're now moving on to Lieutenant Colonel Perro Petland, Gender Advisor in the Norwegian Armed Forces. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Petland. Thank you very much for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are right now. My focus will actually be on the Norwegian Armed Forces and what we're doing there, because despite Norway and the Norwegian Army has when it comes to peace and security agenda, these are my points of view, or armed forces specifically. I'm the first gender advisor in the Norwegian National Forces, GENADs to ISAF, but nationally, not so much, and they're quite extensive and robust forces. And here I definitely agree with them. We're good at integrating this in our national. What I would say is that, being the first gender advisor, my main objectives right now is to establish a gender network in the Norwegian Armed Forces. And I started in my position in April 2021, and by August this year, we will have 7 additional gender advisors on operational and tactical level, plus 3 gender focal points on different units in the armed forces. So the achievement is facilitating a approach to gender education in the armed forces, and that is what I'm currently doing. So I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Your audio is cutting out. Perhaps you could turn off your video. It might help with the audio connection. I'm so sorry. Do you hear me better now? Yes, we can hear you, I think. Thank you. So I'm currently in communication with the Norwegian Defence College on integrating then gender education on specific gender perspective in military operations. In addition, education on the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, as specifically focusing on gender perspective in some basic tactical level up to the challenges I have are
being a male gender advisor is not the same as female gender advisors. So plus 35 years plus in the armed forces with quite extensive operational planning background gives me more leverage than many others who have this position. The opportunities I see is in the Norwegian Armed Forces, we have divided the Women, Peace and Security agenda into two positions, more or less. We have a diversity and equality advisor, civilian advisor, who deals with internal gender equality, gender balance, and the environment, the internal environment in Norwegian Armed Forces. And we work closely together. So I have the more operational approach, practical approach, planning, execution of operations, and she has the more internal view. Recommendations, I will agree with Lena Kvarving, leadership buying, but I do have leadership support on strategic level and political level. The main challenge in view and my experience is the mid-level commanders. If you see what's in it for them, a lot of what we teach there. So if it is target audience analysis, who you're talking to, and talk their language. Explain to them examples, give examples, and what's in it for them. That's the most important. That's basically it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Per. I'm so sorry about the audio. You were breaking up quite a lot, but I think some of your excellent points came across very well. Certainly in our research, we found that male gender advisors faced many challenges, but they also were able to break down this conflation of women and gender that Claire just spoke about. So that's probably, you know, one significant achievement and positive to your work, as well as accessing certain communities that you might otherwise not be able to, as well as the preventing of access as well. Thank you so much. I hope that you'll be able to reiterate some of your recommendations regarding mid-level leadership when we have the Q&A, because I think we missed part of that. Thank you so much. So I'd now like to turn to Lieutenant Colonel Luzanne Sengemana Engabere, please. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, you'll excuse my voice, just coming from a flu. I would like, first of all, to thank Monash University, DCAF, UN Women, and OD for this opportunity to virtually sit with such a high-level, impressive co-panelist here. I would also like to congratulate also the authors of the global review on that formidable work. I do recall exchange of email with the author mid last year, and I almost forget about it, but I'm glad that it's back, and now we do have findings and recommendation and overall feedback on that research. Again, I'm dual-hatted in the Office of Military Affairs and DPO. I'm a part of the policy and doctrine team as a capability development officer, but I'm also a gender advisor to the military advisor in the Office of Military Affairs. So two hats, not easy for a GENAD. Again, I'm not going to repeat everything my predecessor already mentioned, Colonel Lena, Claire, and as well as my predecessor. In a nutshell, what I would do is I'm responsible for coordinating and guiding OMA leadership and also my colleagues on matters related to gender equality, WPS agenda, and also all the cross-cutting issues such as conflict-related sexual violence. But I also liaise and bridge OMA DPO with military gender advisor in the mission, as well as focal point. We do have a solid network that we have put together with the mission, gender advisor, and focal point. And we do have often workshop together and retreat with them as well. But I'm also the link with the other uniformed components, police, justice and correctional, as well as the civilian component within DPO, but also in the mission. I'm not going to repeat again what the different challenges, but I'm going to share with you some of the achievements that we are currently working on and what we did already in the past years. So I joined the Office of Military Affairs in 2019, and when I joined, I inherited some projects that I need to work on, but also I need to put together some other projects. What I can do in terms of achievement is, the number one is in terms of gender parity, in terms of meeting the target and goals of the Uniform Gender Parity Strategy, which is basically aimed at increasing women participation as peacekeeper in peace operation. So as of now, we have reached beyond the 2022 target of 19%. We are at 21% of women peacekeeper deployed in all missions. But we are lagging behind again with women peacekeeper deployed into troop and contingent. That is one part, gender parity. Now, in terms of now what Claire rightfully mentioned about building capacity, building skills and knowledge of GENAD and focal point, what we are working on currently, and we hope to see the light of it and the end of it and launch it by the end of this year. We are currently working on a military gender advisor and focal point course training in two formats, in a self-paced format online. That phase, we launched it last year. It's accessible by all military, civilian, police, everybody can access to it. The version is in French and in English, and we tackle the conceptual, the legal, but also an introduction to an operational framework of what should be the job and the role and responsibility of a military gender advisor, but as well as military gender focal point. We are currently working also in another phase, what we call the phase 2, which will be a more in-person training, also aim at the target of gender advisor and focal point to have more scenario-based role playing and exercise on how to basically integrate, how to, us as a military, integrate the gender perspective into our daily work, into the military component in the field. And we hope by the end of this year, again, we'll have a final product. But we are also currently working also on a case study handbook on gender, peace and security, which is a training resource in response of a growing need for practical hands-on training on how to implement the WPS mandate and gender equality for the military, for the boots on the ground, how to make sure that the private, the soldier, the corporal who is on the ground, how does he understand that this, what he's doing or what she should be doing or she should be doing is basically integrating gender perspective into the military component. So the case study handbook will be a good reference for one reference of the United Nations Infantry Battalion training material. We hope also to launch the case study handbook by the end of this year, if it's not summer or fall. It has several learning modality, self-learning modality, moderated and enacted also learning modalities. It's quite extensive. We have put a lot of effort in it. We try to make sure that it's easy and easy to digest for military in general, but also for everyone as well. Also, we do have also other project in the pipeline. I did work on a guideline on how to integrate gender perspective into the military component, which is nothing too which is not the case study handbook, but the guideline also is in the pipeline for approval and will be launched also this year. And then I will stop right there in terms of achievement of work we are working on. We do have also other project in the pipeline. In terms of opportunities, several opportunities. So already Clara mentioned some, Lena mentioned some. What I will say for me, for example, personally, again, you mentioned I'm from the Rwanda Defense Forces. I think the #1 opportunity I see is for myself and for my country. When I joined in 2019 as a military gender, as a capability development officer and gender specialist in the Office of Military Affairs, I came with my small background, my national background, and my experience in peacekeeping mission as part of a contingent. But when I will leave the Office of Military Affairs after 4 years, you can imagine I'll be somebody else with a wealth of knowledge and lesson learned and practices and experiences that I will bring into my army. And then we can then, with my experience, tackle the different issues, organizational issues and structural culture inside our own military. I think that is the #1 opportunity that I can see personally, but also to our army and also for future deployment if I'm being deployed in the future. In terms of challenges, again, the challenges are the same. I'm happy that we have a male gender advisor in the panelist. That is great. But again, the challenges is how to not equate, how to make sure that the boots on the ground, the military, do not equate gender equal women. That for me is the big challenges. We need to make sure that in everything we are saying, in all our narrative, we need to be careful of what we are saying and making sure that the audience, the interlocutor in front of us, do understand that gender does not equate to women, that everybody, regardless the gender identity or expression, could be a gender advisor. It's require a lot of skills and knowledge. Yes, I agree with Claire. That's why we keep working on that. And advocacy and talking and this type of event are also very important and need to reach out to a bigger audience. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lausanne. Thanks for reiterating the immense skills and knowledge that GENADs require. And in turn, as Claire mentioned earlier, that will increase the seriousness with which the role of the GENAD is taken. And thank you very much for highlighting the benefits of GENADs and their work, but also the achievements. And I think that's something that we can focus more on. Certainly, we've identified that one of the deficits in the work of GENADs is that there isn't necessarily this sharing of resources, this development of case studies. So your handbook is going to be fantastic there, and a platform for the sharing of best practices and lessons learned. So thank you so much for talking to the many achievements that you're working towards and have achieved already. So I'd like to introduce our last speaker, Major Yasmina Omegovic. She is the gender advisor to the Chief of Joint Staff of the Bosnia and Herzegovina Armed Forces. Thank you so much for joining us, Yasmina. Welcome.
Thank you so much for invitation to participate. First, I would like to thank Lieutenant Colonel for gender parity strategy. Strategy is very useful document. So I hope there'll be more documents like that. So although we all came from different backgrounds, different armed forces, the guidelines you have given are really unique. A special gender advisor are still new to the armed forces. So global review is really priceless. So we are still evolving. We take a small step and our traces are most visible in concrete activities, operations, missions. So I will emphasize just a few important things, and I will include experience from BNH. Also, I will try to be very brief in my address. So in June 2020, gender audit of the armed forces B&H was conducted and provide more than 50 recommendations and measures in 4 key areas. So comprehensive gender analysis, armed forces B&H, harmonization of defense sector policy and regulation, improving military infrastructure, and gender mainstreaming in military training and education. So GENAD is involved in all these activities from the planning to evaluation, but not just GENAD. So for successful implementation of the planned activities, we have established temporary working groups headed by a general who, thanks to their authorities, have been able to deal with all set of different challenges that they faced in this complex process. So that link between leadership and their effort to implement gender perspective in case of armed forces B&H was crucial. So here is maybe important to emphasize the training related to gender provided by Inspector General based on Building Integrity Training Program, which goals are to raise awareness of gender equality and prevention and fight against of any kind of sexual discrimination, harassment, and abuse. So last year, through that training and the topics code of ethnic, code of conduct, gender equality, were attended more than 1,500 persons. So all these processes were initiated and fully supported by Brigadier General Mirsad Ahmic, who is Inspector General also, and also gender champion. So when we spoke about training, I came to human security. Also, you mentioned that in review. We are introducing principles of human security with support of our partners, British Army, and with the goal of developing doctrine, training instructors, military personnel and units, and potentially establishing a regional center of excellence. So this training concept is an approach of interpreting security that focuses on the individual and also on the needs of different category of the population during the conflict, peace building, and also integrates WPS principles into military activity. So through this training and concept, we have included topics into military activities, into military exercise, and training scenarios. So we include civil protection, VPS, DDR, sexual violence in conflict, also children in armed conflict, and so on. So human security is definitely one of the new approach to the concept of security that military personnel and units of in my armed forces undergo through theoretical and practical training. So we are especially proud of our practical training capability enabled through using a state-of-the-art mobile urban training facility provided by the United Kingdom government. So I can speak about training a lot, but I will give a couple of sentences about the military infrastructure, which is very important for this part. So infrastructure at armed forces B&H locations is inherited from Yugoslav army male dominant system. So as a part of VPS Chad network commitment, currently we are in process of upgrading gender safe and friendly infrastructure at key armed forces location. So I believe that impact of communication on achievement of gender equality goals is priceless. However, ongoing research into the new approaches is required with the key points highlighted. So by integrating the principles of WPS agenda, integration, inclusion, integrity, interactivity of the armed forces, we practically include gender in entire defense system. So from strategic to tactical level, which give us a great potential in terms of supporting, analyzing, planning, execution, and evaluation. So I will stop here. I'll give you some good news from Bosnia. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Yasmina. It's great to hear some good news, and thanks for sharing everything that you're doing in terms of integrating gender perspectives across the whole of the armed forces of BIH. That's wonderful to hear, and thanks also for emphasizing the importance of communication, and clear, articulate communication of the role and value of GENADs is a key part of that. So thank you so much. I'd like to thank all speakers for such outstanding presentations. We've now got quite a lot of time, luckily, for Q&A. We've got just under 30 minutes. So please do continue to post your questions in the Q&A function or in the chat. I've got a first question that Professor Liku has already responded to, but I wonder if I should open it to the floor. It's the first question we got, and I think it would be quite useful to hear from others about recommendations. So throughout many of your presentations, you were indicating that the GENAD requires specific skills, substantive skills, extensive skills and knowledge, and this would help contribute to the regard with which GENADs are held. So the question is from Ellen Haring. Did you find any examples, or have you come across any examples that could be used as models for other militaries? Have you determined, or would you like to comment on what a GENAD's knowledge, skills and abilities should be? So for example, and Kate has responded to this in the chat, simply recommending things like requisite rank and gravitas is not sufficient. And we go into detail in the report about what we mean by what level of rank there should be and what we mean by gravitas. But I'd like to hand it over to one of the 5 speakers, and then Kate, if you'd like to comment further on top of your chat, please. Would anyone like to respond to the question? Any examples that we could use, or any specific recommendations about the knowledge, skills, abilities and rank that a GENAD should have, or how we can measure them or develop them? Yes, Per, thank you so much. I didn't see your hand. Thank you.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. For instance, I'm positioned in the operation branch, operation/planning branch. The positions in the Norwegian Armed Forces that will be established now in August, a main requirement is operational planning experience and knowledge. Not so much the civilian gender academic knowledge, which has been previous, because they are to implement it in a military organization in military operations. So the knowledge of military planning and operations we see as quite important, and they will also be positioned in the operation or planning branch, because we have diversity and equality advisors or officers on all levels. So their main knowledge base should be, in our opinion, the military operational or planning experience. And they will be on tactical level. They will be rank of major, or 2 of them will be OR 8. So that's my take.
Thank you so much, Per. Thank you very much. Claire, did I see your hand. I'm sorry if I'm mistaken.
No, but I can chip in.
Thank you.
You know, I think as in any role, be it military or civilian, one of the most important areas needed is communication. And one of the problems is for genders, how do you communicate? How do you articulate your strategic thinking in a way that is going to make sense and to be taken seriously? And I think the idea of communication and also collaboration and working with others from other organizations is essential. So, you know, again, like I said, I don't think gender advisors need to have anything different than other requirements you have in jobs. To be able to bring your knowledge forward in a way that makes sense to your commander, and to be able to justify what you're talking about. It comes down to basic communications, and there are many other skills, of course, but I do think that that is sometimes lacking, and I've seen lacking in times in both NATO missions as well as UN missions.
Thank you very much, Claire. Lena, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add that I think it also depends on where you're going to work in the organization. If it is on the tactical, operational, or the strategic level, that the knowledge might be a little different depending on where you work and at what level. So when you're talking about NATO levels, or if it's at the national level, there might be different needs to how can I say, job requirements at the different levels. So I think it all depends. But definitely I support Claire with, you have to have the ability to communicate and cooperate to get your message through. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lena. And especially as you highlighted in your earlier presentation, if you're dealing with power dynamics and challenging leadership, then you really do have to have those communication skills and influencing skills, as well as being quite resilient, I would imagine. Thank you. Would anyone else like to respond to the question posed? I think it also speaks to the need for a career structure, a clear career structure, and also investment in training that has come through many of your presentations and the report that Kate referred to earlier. So I'll move to the next question from Linda Obo. In view of the recent need to deploy military gender advisors, there is often the deployment of officers who do not have any background knowledge in gender and related issues. What can be done in such situations? It relates to the first question somewhat, since this phenomenon tends to downplay the importance of the appointment and duty of GENADs. Yes, Lausanne, thank you so much.
Yes. I just want to share, for example, the example of cases that happen currently in UN peacekeeping mission, where you do have sometime military gender advisor deployed at the force headquarters level and then they come with not necessarily the right background or the right skills and knowledge that is required. And then it's where we solely require the assistance and the help and the collaboration from the civilian component, because the civilian component is the institutional memory of gender-related matters in a conflict setting, in a mission per se. So it's where it's very important that collaboration and cooperation with other components who has institutional memory and enough background to make sure that they keep up speed the incoming officer, because we all do know that in some mission they are deployed for 6 months only, or 1 year. And again, I agree with Claire, in 6 months, what can you do in 6 months or 1 year? And to make sure that you keep up the speed, a military gender advisor, you need to have an entire team, an entire network of colleagues who can support your work, but who can support you also throughout your deployment.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lausanne. Claire, yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, and I want to build on this. And this has been a long challenge, and with the UN, it's been a challenge. And I think one of the, the issue of the lack of coordination between military and civilian gender advisors is an incredible obstacle. The territorialism, and we see this in UN peace operations. We see this in many missions, not just for the UN. And this is where I think it can be very useful, because civilian gender advisors often deploy for many years. They have PhDs, they have long backgrounds in the knowledge of gender. That can be looked into and used in a really effective way, and they could work together to advance this, as opposed to siloing it into different mechanisms, be it military or civilian. And I also don't believe that, gender advisors need to be there for too long as well. I think on the civilian side, if you're there for 10 or 11 years, that's also not great, because there's a lot of, you become stale. I believe that deploying people for a skill set for a specific mission is really useful. If a mission is more focused on security sector reform, then maybe that's the skill set that needs to be deployed. And so I think, as opposed to in the future looking at gender as a capability, or gender as a construct of a role, that maybe we look at the skill sets needed within a mission and deploy to that. And that could be either military, it could be civilian, it doesn't matter. But I do think we have to find a different mechanism altogether, because we've been doing the same thing over and over again, and it doesn't seem to be working. So, I think looking outside of the box in the future and working together with each of the organizations, both civilian and military, can only produce better results. And I hope that, we could look at that in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire. Kate, yes, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Eleanor. In the interviews that we had with current and former gender advisors, we heard many stories of gender advisors being appointed simply because they were a woman. And we heard that over and over again. So gender advisors were going into roles where they felt they had no or very limited amount of training and not a clear sense of what the role involved. So one of the things we've done in the report is we've put in a bit of a template for what a gender advisor job description looks like. And we've tried to detail what the duties are, as well as what the qualifications, skills and experiences that might be needed to really demonstrate the need for professional, technical, knowledge-based skills around the role. And this is something that GenWIT was designed. So I'd encourage everyone to have a look at that. Thanks, Eleanor.
Thank you very much, Kate. We have a few more questions and 15 more minutes if anyone wants to post a final question or two in the chat or Q&A. A question back to Lausanne, if that's okay with you. How can you break the link between gender and women that you refer to, the conflation of women with gender? If your main deliverables, and I'm not sure it is your main deliverables, perhaps you want to comment on that, appears to be reaching a certain percentage of women in military organisations or who are deployed onto peace operations. Thank you, Lausanne.
Thank you. So my main deliverable is not only reaching the target, that is one. And we need to remember, to keep reminding ourselves that the WPS agenda is built on 4 pillars: prevention, participation, protection, and recovery. So in terms of participation, if we want to meet as military, sitting here in the Office of Military Affairs, DPO, deploying troops on the ground, individual personnel on the ground, what am I doing in terms of meeting that one pillar, which is participation in peacekeeping operation? That could be through participation of women peacekeepers. That's why we have a set of goals and targets we want to achieve in terms of women participation. Now, the question could be the other way around. Why can we have a percentage of men to be deployed? We all know that a military organization is a male-dominated world. So trying to reach out to the other half of the population to make sure that we have them deployed is what we are aiming to. That is one. So this is not my main job. Now, in terms of how to make sure that military don't equate gender and women is by advocacy and talking and event. Everything we are doing currently, in my opinion, we should have opened even that discussion, and I hope that the recording video of that will reach out to a maximum of TCC and also military organization around the globe, so they do understand that when we talk, when we kept talking and keep talking, we as gender advisor or focal point kept saying that gender is not equal to women. It takes time, but it will take time. I mean, we are in a male-dominated area. I mean, organization. I mean, it will take time. It will take advocacy. It will take even like this. It will take educating and training and making sure that military peacekeeper or military in general, uniform personnel in general do understand. Yeah, it takes time. But again, reaching the goal is not my main task. I do have also other projects, other achievements on my plate.
Thank you so much, Lausanne. That's a really important point that you raise. Of course, if your work is to be gender responsive, or the work of military organisations is to be gender responsive, a great part of that is gender parity. So we do need to address the structural, organisational, cultural barriers to women's engagement. So it's part and parcel of the same thing. I think you articulated that extremely well. Thank you so much, Lausanne. Yes, please, Perro.
Yes, I just want to agree with Lausanne that give examples, give practical examples why I would say diversity. So gender diversity is one of many diversities. You can talk about ethnicity, religion, whatever. And diversity in any organization will give more perspectives on planning for an operation, decision making, etc., etc. So it will always improve an organization and give examples on how this will improve, and eventually we will learn. We will see how this actually improves an organization and thereby your tasks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Perro. Diversity is absolutely critical if we're to have a diversity of skills, knowledge and capabilities. Thank you very much. Claire, yes, please.
The floor, but I do want to go back to the issue of gender parity and gender advising. And I think it is really important that gender advisors do separate, as was said, and it's great to hear that in military Office of Military Affairs, it is being separate, because gender parity is a human resources issue, and it shouldn't be dealt with by the gender advisor, because raising numbers of women, and if that is going to be the concentration for any gender advisor, then we're going to always be within this role of counting numbers. And that is where I think some of the discrepancy with credibility and legitimacy falls down, because then it does become, it's a woman's issue, it's about getting more women, and then it becomes this back and forth. And so I would, I think in the work that I've always done, I've always separated out and said, this is not an issue that we will deal with because it's human resources, but we're dealing with integration. And unfortunately, it seems that the mandate, the Women, Peace and Security mandate, has been taken over by the conversation on parity. And I understand, because it is easier in a way to look at numbers, but it also is very dangerous. And if gender advisors are going to be given that task and going to take that task on, then I don't see us being able to move a bit further forward than we should in terms of strategic engagement and advice. So it is a cautionary tale that I think we should take note of.
A really important cautionary tale. Thank you so much, Claire. Perhaps this next question follows on from that really important point raised by Claire and Lausanne, if you want to come back on it as well. So thinking more about the skills required by a gender advisor, but the work that they do. So linking, if we're thinking about the work they do, then of course it leads us to the skills they need to develop. What specific skills do they need? So Is it that they need to be able to conduct a gender analysis or deliver training or advocate or lobby? What specific skills are particularly important to the work of the GENAD, recognizing it's of course going to be very different in different contexts? Lausanne, would you like to go first, and then I'll maybe ask Yasmina to come in on that?
Yeah. I think Dr. Colonel Lena mentioned that earlier. It's all depend. It's all depend where are you going to be deployed. Are you going to be deployed as gender advisor in the Office of Military Affairs in DPO, where you do have access to a variety of member state and TCC with different background and knowledge and different way of thinking? Or are you going to be a military gender advisor in MINUSCA in Central African Republic, where you need to reach out to community, to build trust with community, with youth association, with men association, with women association, where you need to bridge, to liaise and coordinate with police? Yeah, it's all depend. Are you only a gender focal point at the contingent level, which again, it's another set of task and responsibility. I think it's all depend where are you going to be deployed. But I think for me, a certain level of gender analysis and advocacy and then communication as well are very important. And I add the basic. For me, they are the basic. And how to integrate gender perspective into wherever, regard the position you are going to be deployed in, how are you going to integrate that? This is one. Gender analysis, this is second. Communication is important, and advocacy. And advocacy is very much important, and advocacy take time. But yeah, it takes time, but advocacy is very much important. But it's all depend again, where are you going to be deployed in strategical level, operational level, tactical level, and in which, like, what are the type of interlocutor you'll be having in front of you? Yeah, it's very much depend.
Thank you very much, Lausanne. Yasmina, did you want to come in on that question? Otherwise, I've got a specific question for Per. Per, if you don't mind thinking and responding to this question from
I'm here
Gabrielle
also.
Oh, sorry, Yasmina first. Would you like to comment on that, the specific skill set that a gender might need? For example, do they need to be able to conduct a gender analysis or conduct a gender audit of a unit or mission, for example?
So I think part of that question it's answered by gender advisor from Norwegian Armed Forces. I am completely agree. So gender perspective, we have to put into military activity. So have to be part of MDMP process, military decision-making process. We have to find a way to start with that. So from my point of my experience, that is one of crucial question. But also, I just also read the question, Mr. Colin Maggie, and about VPS agenda and military implementing VPS agenda in operation. That is, maybe I can find some kind of connection in that. So our goal is always implement the mission, always. So military mission is priority, but when you are on the field, more than 60% of population are women and children, especially in traditional society. And my male colleague, he simply cannot access to information, cannot speak with children. He can't speak with women. When we planning, women have a strong voice, and women in traditional society have a strong influence over the man. So their voice is not public, but is equally important. Their voice is not visible. So from the experience, that approach and understanding of importance of planning is different when it comes to uniformed women. Maybe this is really because we simply analyze a much wider range of facts we take into account the need different categories. We take in account needs of female, also need of children. So I was planner in both mission, and every time I bring something different in the whole planning process. So I don't know. I try to make some visible answer, but I hope that's it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Yasmina. And it really leads nicely into the last question. We just have 2 minutes left for Perro, if you don't mind. A question about the challenges you faced as a male GENAD. You indicated some of them. Unfortunately, the audio cut out a little bit. But the question is, what are the main challenges you faced as a male GENAD? And do people confuse your role?
Well, I'll give you an example. When I deployed as a gender advisor at ISAF HQ, I was also the head of, per se, not formally, but informally, of all gender advisors and GFPs, so gender focal points, in the Kabul area. And my first meeting, I was heading the meeting, and when I started talking, someone asked me, one of them asked me, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm the new GENAD." "No, you can't be." "Yes, I am." "No, you're not a woman." So, and that is, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen also in the Norwegian armed forces. When we discuss this, I'll be ridiculed, kind of, for advocating for feministic identity policies and ideas in the Norwegian armed forces. And here is where the operational, practical examples always come in. How do you use this? What, for instance, in the Norwegian armed forces, one of the strategic objectives is protection of the population. And as you know, we all need different security, or we have different security issues, resource management, resource capabilities, or access, etc., etc. And it's part of the armed forces. And just doing that and giving examples on how we are different depending on gender or ethnicity, age, disabilities, etc., etc., and how that impacts your job as military, both positive and negative, is key. So it's a different, I wouldn't say that I meet as many obstacles or challenges as a female gender advisor, and I've seen more than once that gender advisors, specifically female gender advisors, have been put in situations where they are too low in rank, not having education. And if you are a captain and you're working with lieutenant colonels and colonels and lacking in gender education at the same time, you're more or less set up for failure. And unfortunately, I've seen that more than once. So education, 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 that is key, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Per. That's such an important point to end on. Well, I'd love to thank all of the 5 speakers and Associate Professor Katrina Liku for the overview of the report, Natasha and Megan as well, and all the co-hosts of the webinar, all the interpreters, everyone who has joined us in discussing the challenges, the opportunities, and some of the achievements of the work of the GENADs. Just by way of a summary, I think some of the identification of some of the core challenges in terms of leadership, lack of awareness of the role and the value of GENADs, perhaps also the issue of double hatting, the conflation of gender and women, and so on, were really key challenges that I think we need to engage with further, and some excellent recommendations about how we can better support the work of the GENAD, perhaps by focusing on communication, leadership, training, investment, and all of the other brilliant recommendations that were shared. I'd urge you to read the reports that have been shared in the chat, and please do fill out the survey if you haven't already. The recording of this webinar will be on DCAF's website and YouTube channel. Thank you everyone again, and good night and goodbye.
Thank you so much. See you.
Thanks, Eleanor. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all.